What a strange little conference this has been, and an important one. Tempting though it is to look away, or to ignore that sense of sort of fatigued disgust that you feel whenever Suella Braverman starts blasting away on her various dog whistles. They're not even really dog whistles anymore. It's a hurricane. Did you know a hurricane of migrants is coming now? A hurricane. What will it be next year? A tsunami. There'll be what comes after a tsunami of people like her parents? I don't know. What would it be? I say fatigue disgust because I'm never on the receiving end of this sort of rhetoric. Obviously, not. Well, I sort of am actually. I presume when she talks about because you can't really name anyone. This is what's so bizarre about this new iteration of the Tory party is that they talk about who their enemies. Say all of these people who call you racist when you talk. Who are these people? I could off the top of my head, you've got Gary Lineker, Carol Vorderman, and me. Who else is there? And I don't have exactly what you'd call an enormous platform. I've got no complaints, but it's not an enormous platform. And Gary Lineker and Carol Vorderman don't even have jobs in the context of political broadcasting. Where is the I don't know, the anti-racist equivalent of the Daily Mail? What is it? What would it be? The Guardian? Come on. Just bizarre. And speaking of the Daily Mail today, they haven't really written it's a really odd speech, actually, by someone called Quentin Letts, who's a curious character. And the very, very first line of the coverage in the cheerleader-in-chief newspaper at the moment, the very first line of the article is, "Predictable voices will hate it." How many times have I said to you over the last few years that they are moving towards a space where every single thing they do will be designed not to improve anybody's lives, but just to annoy the people that they consider to be their enemies? In many ways, the first indication of this was all of the people who insisted that they still supported Brexit, even as it fell apart around their ears, because it upset all the right people. Do you remember that phrase? You started, it upsets all the right people. I think we've all been tempted to use that phrase in some circumstances, but when it's actually a platform for government rather than just a pithy throwaway line on social media, you've got a bit of a problem. Why are you doing that? You have all the levers of government. What are you going to do with them? Oh, we're going to upset all the right people. And then you got I don't know if you remember, the Remainer-teers. Do you remember the era of the Remainer-teers? When people who were being shown daily that they'd fallen for the biggest crock of shocking amounts of sewage since time began, insisted that they didn't mind the fact that they'd been lied to. I don't mind at all that my life hasn't improved in any measurable way, and that the food that Jacob Rees-Mogg promised me would be cheaper is now more expensive than ever before. I don't mind at all, because look at all those Remainer-teers. I'm drinking Remainer-teers. And you sort of sat here and thought, everyone enjoys a little bit of Schadenfreude. Particularly vintage Schadenfreude. I keep a few bottles of Schadenfreude in my cellar at home and crack open the corks on occasion. But you can't live on... Man cannot live on Schadenfreude alone. So taking pleasure in the misfortunes of your perceived foes becomes not only ridiculous, but also downright dangerous when the source of your perceived foes' unhappiness is bad stuff happening to everybody. So they've all started saying, people who talk our country down. And this is what you do. You say this, you say, people are talking our country down. Well, I love our country. And you sort of think, well, if you love our country, why are you allowing this sort of stuff to happen to it? We've got 1 million vacancies across various sectors in this country. The NHS crying out for new staff. But we're going to make speeches about why we don't want people to come here. Why are you going to do that? Because it upsets all the right people. 2023, a hurricane of immigration. 2024, a tsunami. 2025, I don't know what comes after a tsunami. And it does, of course, it upsets what Quentin Letts calls the predictable voices. But it's not a kind of, it's more of a, do you know, it's more like when you've got an incontinent cat that keeps peeing on your carpet and you keep thinking, maybe it'll stop. And yes, predictable voices will hate it. I wish the incontinent cat would stop peeing on the carpet. But it's so boringly unpleasant now. It's so predictably disgusting that you find your visceral reaction to it. I don't know that it's diluting. It's just pathetic. Does this stuff resonate now anywhere beyond the editorial floor of the Daily Mail and their increasingly desiccated readership? Does it still land? Numbers are coming down for the Tories, but they're still at 27%. And then you look at an interesting development. I'm going to allow myself a brief pat on the back for this. I wrote in my first book, How to Be Right in a World Gone Wrong, that in order to stem the decline in this country, the media had to step up to the plate and start being a lot more robust with blatant lies. They had to start, for example, playing politicians, comments made by their colleagues, and insisting that they account for them before you would persist or continue with the interview that they had been booked to do. Ideally, you would play recordings of politicians themselves. You'd actually play the tape of them to the politician and say, what the hell were you talking about? That's a little bit harder to arrange. But the idea that you can now see, as we talked about yesterday, secretaries of state, an actual secretary of state, standing on stage in front of the party faithful and talking complete rollicks is incredible. But because it has happened incrementally, we haven't really registered how serious it is. You cannot... listen, all politicians are liars was that hilarious refrain that the bloke down at St. Stephen's Green used to intone whenever a microphone appeared, to the incredible annoyance of broadcasters and the amusement, perhaps, of those of us who haven't really matured quite as much as we probably should have done by this stage in our lives. But I look back now and think, oh, you absolute plum. They're not all liars. And also, there are gradations of lies. There are little white lies. There are embellishments. There is people who are an economé with the actualité. And then there are barefaced lies. And then, of course, context becomes important. The question of where the lies are being told. So, at a UKIP conference, you'd expect loads of lies and you'd never be disappointed. But at a Conservative Party conference, you'd probably expect the worst lies to be confined to the fringes. And even then, you wouldn't expect the lies to be as egregious as Susan Hall claiming that Jews were frightened of Sadiq Khan, as she did a couple of nights ago. So everything is shifting. They call it the Overton window in the context of political leanings. But it's not just the question of shifting to the right. There's a shift away from observable reality. And it, of course, in many ways begins with Brexit and the fact that Farage is dancing around Manchester like a sort of superannuated member of Black Lace. That's relevant as well. That push pineapple, shake that tree. There is obviously something there, because not long ago, most Tory members would have quite rightly turned their noses up at his particularly pungent brand of jingoism and ignorance. But that's who the Tory party is now. And once they've embraced that, then I guess the lies will follow. And my God, the lies. It's actually incredible. And I don't know that there's any two sides to it anymore. You can say, well, Labour would be worse, and I'll give you a lollipop and tell you to stay away from scissors. But you can't, or I suppose you could say, well, there were no weapons of mass destruction. And you'd think, yeah, okay, that's absolutely relevant to a conversation in 2023 about a Secretary of State claiming that councils are going to stop you from using roads or limit the number of journeys you can make, or whatever it may be. It's just bonkers. And finally, journalists are beginning to push back against it. On Newsnight last night, Victoria Derbyshire did an absolutely brilliant job, which listeners to this programme will be quite familiar with, the technique or the tactics. But better late than never, lads. Thank God the BBC has now caught up. Have a listen to this with the Secretary of State for Culture? Is it Michelle Donnellan? This is the only way you can do it now. But also listen to how blithely and how cynically the politician involved just sort of attempts to ignore reality and continue down a path of fantasy.
In your speech today, you said something that really struck me. You said, we are the party of facts. I wonder if I could ask you to just have a little look at this, please.
A government diktat to sort your rubbish into 7 different bins.
What is sinister and what we shouldn't tolerate is the idea that local councils can decide how often you go to the shops.
It's no wonder that Labour seems so relaxed about taxing meat.
How can you be the party of facts when none of that is true?
We are the party that stands up for facts, and my announcement today...
I'm going to pause you right there. None of those 3 things are true.
Well, it certainly is true. There are a lot of people that have been calling for a meat taxation. And is this government that have been stemming
I'm not going to let this go. There was never a proposal to use 7 bins. We can't find any council that wants to decide how often people can go to shops. And Labour have never proposed taxing meat. They are untruths, they are fiction, they are completely and utterly made up. And it's really disrespectful to voters.
All hail Victoria, Derbyshire. It's really disrespectful to voters. That is the point. And then, of course, there is Andrew Boff being slung out of conference for sort of mild muttering in protest at some of the bile coming out of Suella Braverman's mouth. But what that Newsnight clip picks up on is something truly remarkable and something profoundly dangerous. Because you could say, and I would disagree with you, but we would be at least engaging on an agreed playing field and playing by agreed rules. You could say that this is nothing new. Politicians always tell lies and they're all as bad as each other. But they're not just doing that. They're standing on stage, and she's the Minister for Science and Innovation, I think. She's standing on stage and saying, we are the party of facts, even as they lie as a governing party in a proper free democracy has never lied before. That's not true, is it? Because Donald Trump, I suppose, was a governor. But anyway, they are claiming, not just lying, but they're claiming to be the party of facts. Now, that is cultish behaviour. It's possibly fascistic, but it's not just the lie. It's the claim that we are telling the truth even as we lie. That's just not normal. And there are lessons throughout history of these examples. It's not just the lie that is egregious. It's the claim that you're the ones telling the truth, because it's actually quite hard to argue. You will remember, I think, that Boris Johnson finally sort of fell victim to his own dishonesty, because that claim, nobody could know what was going on in my mind, that is actually, I mean, it's a tactic of coercive control. It's designed to allow you to essentially frame your own reality, which is at odds with observable reality. Ignore the evidence of your eyes and ears, said Big Brother in 1984. Ignore the evidence of your eyes and ears. That is the party's final command. And that's what they're doing now. Listen, I have touched on and tickled and flirted with the Orwellian comparisons almost for as long as I've been doing this job. Certainly for as long as I've been awake while doing this job, which I've got to be honest with you, was not for the first few years. I was kind of just going along with the flow. But since I've come to understand how things work, that line there of actually, I mean, and Orwell knows of what he speaks, doesn't he? The idea that you are now being told to ignore the evidence of your own eyes and ears, not just by the media, which wouldn't be that new, but by secretaries of state, by cabinet ministers. It's incredible, right? It is conditioning, writes Page. If they can condition people to believe the lies, then they can tell any lies they like. They've learned from Trump. It's as simple as that. They've seen Trump and they've seen Boris, and they've seen how few consequences there are. It's a great point. It's as if they're now experimenting, which is why Victoria, Derbyshire and others pushing back is so important. But it's also why, don't forget, they're setting up their own television stations. And they've already tested the water by telling lies about vaccines or telling lies about lockdowns. What lie? They're pushing it constantly. What lies can we tell? And then, you know, if they're worried about being called out for their lies, they're very picky and very choosy about where they appear. They're trying to create a media environment in which their lies don't matter. And I worry, hand on heart, and if you follow this programme closely, you'll know I can say this with both evidence and complete sincerity. I worry we've left it too late.